Hey, welcome to the Epicenter, where we're going to continue exploring what does it look like to be the epicenter of the boom. Hey, welcome into the Epicenter. I'm joined once again by my partner in this, Roswell Smith Jr.
Good morning, man. Good morning.
Good
I
morning.
see you got your little mug here. What you got in here, man? Some cold brew or what? You got some coffee in there? What you drinking today?
Man, you know better than that.
Come on now, man.
You know better than that. I've got me some amino acids up in there.
It's just deceiving our audience, man. They seeing that mug thinks that there's gonna be coffee in there.
Yeah,
but
hey, it's sweet though.
Hey, man, you know what?
Fruit fusion.
Teach his own, bro. Man. You just be fruity over there, then go ahead.
So, hey, listen, man, we're
get you right there.
You saw my wife driving the other day, is that right?
Yeah, man. She was going to Starbucks, turning in, and I was looking, and I was like, it was just fast though, her and the kids. So I know you weren't in the truck, bro.
Yeah, you wouldn't see me
going
in
to
there.
Starbucks, man.
No, you wouldn't see me in there. But I did try some cold brew, man.
I remember you saying that. Yeah, how was that experience for you?
It was pretty good. It was called a Cuban.
Yeah, bro, Cubans are good.
Yeah, it was good. I don't know what that means. But
well, it's just a mixture of different things. They put a little bit of, flavoring in there and put the coffee in there, but it was a coffee-based drink. So you're getting there, man. Small steps.
Small steps. We're
getting
there.
That's all we can do, man.
But right now, I got my aminos in
Yes,
there.
sir. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. So I want to recap a little bit. You weren't involved in the interview with Wes Yoder,
right.
But you watched it whenever we dropped it. Tell me what you thought about it. Tell me what you thought about Wes and what he brought.
Yeah, so for the viewers, if y'all saw that interview, one thing you saw right away was that this guy was very experienced and very just wise, very sage. Mm-hmm. Not because his hair was gray, but because he really did have sage wisdom. Yeah. I think the conversation y'all had really, I thought, was life-giving for a lot of different reasons. For Boom, because we are targeting, men and leadership and how to kind of wake them up to themselves, who they're called to be, their identity in Christ, which today we'll get into.
Yep.
But in that same idea, one thing he said that I thought was very interesting was he talked about how we could get the church leaders and to wake up and see the power of the Holy Spirit and dwell in us and just begin to kind of wrap, his hands around like that idea. I thought it was powerful, man, just from the standpoint of, it was so poignant that he, through all of his writing, all of his experience, that was like one of the things I feel like emerged from all of his experience that I felt like was worth sharing in that moment. And of course, just his whole story and what he's been doing with his life, pretty powerful. So if you haven't seen it yet, go back and watch Episode 4. Episode 4.
Yep.
Really good stuff.
Yeah, it was awesome, man.
Really good stuff.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that, we are on a mission to do, and this is what I feel like God has led me towards, is this mission to wake up business leaders and the existing current generation of men.
Yes.
And then segue into bros operating on mission, right? And
young
capture
men.
this young generation coming up, so that we can direct them and guide them in the ways they're supposed to go, right? This is a fatherless generation. We see divorce rates the highest they've ever been, absentee dads, all the things, right? And so I think one of the things that God has really, really, really laid on my heart is to wake guys up to their identity.
Yes.
Identity.
Yes, sir.
Because you can do nothing until you know your identity, right? We've touched on the world tells you to seek your truth, but the reality is they're missing step one, which is to seek the truth,
right?
Because then Jesus comes into you and begins to pour in his identity himself into who you are, so that way you can go out and you can begin to do these things, right? So as we're headed into 2021, hopefully it's a different.
Get us out of this year.
Get us out of this year, man. Get out.
That's right, man.
Yeah, but get out of this year. But move into 2021. We'll be moving into New Year's resolutions, all the different things.
Right.
And so one of the things that is going to happen with New Year's resolutions, guys are going to get back in the gym. Hopefully, if they're open in the towns you're at, right? But what usually happens when you get back in the gym, you hadn't been there, you get sore.
Yeah. Either you quit, you go in day 2, and you say, you know what? It's too much, or you fight through it. And you walk with that soreness. That's right.
Yep. But the soreness is what begins to build the muscles, right?
Absolutely.
You got to go through the soreness. You're not going to get any stronger, bigger muscles, anything like that, without going through the soreness, right? And so as I went through this last year and a half of God just taking me through this, I've gone through some soreness in this like spiritual awakening inside of my spiritual soreness.
That's good. Yep.
And he's been wrestling with me on certain things and just changing my paradigms, and what we are after is now going out and helping other guys recognize this.
Yeah.
And so I want to share a little bit of the story, go a little bit deeper through this journey that God has taken me on, through the different scriptures that he's given me, all this different stuff. So we've talked on some of them.
Right.
Galatians 5. Don't just hide it as an idea in your head or a sentiment in your heart.
That was a big one for us. Yeah.
But work out its implications in every detail of your life, right? It should come pouring out everywhere. Then Revelation 12:11, they defeated him, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb, Jesus first, and the word of their testimony, their story. Well, then God takes me into Ezekiel.
Okay.
And I'd never read fully Ezekiel, touched on some parts of it or whatever, but he takes me to Ezekiel 1. And I'm reading Ezekiel 1, and Ezekiel's having this vision. And I'm like, God, what do you have for me here? And I get to the end of chapter 1, and I was not feeling what was there or whatever. And he said, just keep reading. So I get into chapter 2, and it says, Son of man, stand up. I've got something for you to go do. So this is like Ezekiel getting called to go do something, to be a prophet to Israel. Well, then at the very end of Ezekiel 2, he takes them through and he tells them, hey, I'm going to send you into this group of people. They're a bunch of rebels. It's Israel. They're a rebellious nation. They've turned from me. They've done all these things. And he says, your job, though, Ezekiel, is to go in there and speak. Whether they listen is not your concern. And so for me, as God had asked me to do this thing with Boom, I mentioned in previous episodes that I'm a people pleaser. I've always been that, or I'd always been that way. I was always nervous about what are people going to think? Do I present it properly? All these different things, right? Well, then God releases me and says, hey, whoa. Your job is to speak. Whether they listen
regardless
is not your concern. I'll take care of that. You just go deliver the message and I'll take care of it. So then he takes me, I don't know exactly the time frame, but just being in God's word. And then he takes me to Matthew 25. Which, if you've been in your Bible, you know that Matthew 25 is the parable. It's got the parable of the talents. It's got several other parables in there, and a lot of it is all about stewardship in Matthew 25. And so he has me focus in on Matthew 25 and the parable of the talents, and he tells me at that moment as I begin to read, he says, change it from a talent to the word story. And so it reads like this. The first guy comes up and he says, Master, you gave me 5 stories. I went out, I got 5 more stories. I got 10 stories to tell you, right? And Jesus looks at him, or the master looks at him, and he says, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a little, but now I'm going to put you in charge of much. Come enjoy your master's happiness. So then the second guy comes up and he says, Master, you gave me 2 stories. I went out, I got 2 more stories, bro. I got 4 stories to tell you. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Says exactly the same thing to him, right? He says, come enjoy your master's happiness. Well, then the third guy comes up and he says, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow. And so I wanted to keep what you gave me safe. And so I buried my story right up here in my head. And I kept it here because I knew it would be safe. And Jesus looks at him and he says, oh, you wicked servant, leave my presence, right? Well, it was so impactful to me because whenever we opened Orange Theory Fitness, I had this opportunity to go down, and I'm responsible to steward this thing, right? And to get it launched the proper way, all these different things. Well, I go down, and nobody knows what Orange Theory Fitness is in San Angelo. There's not one there. One guy even said he thought it was a Orange Julius, like an ice cream place or whatever.
It's a brand new market.
So brand new market. So I'm the one responsible to sell this, and to steward it well, right? Well, I had equated an Orange Theory workout with the Texas Tech workout in regards to how intense it was, all the things I mentioned in the first episode, but it was like a party, man, and it kicked my butt, but I liked it.
It was an experience.
It was an experience. And so I had this like kind of analogy or equation that said, hey, this is like a Division I workout. It's gonna work you out hard, but in all my humbleness, I always hid the fact that I played football at Texas Tech. So I had this struggle, and I was like, man, do I tell people this? Do I not? Do I make this correlation? Because I didn't want to be that guy that was like, when I played football at Texas Tech, and all those kind of things, the prideful side of things.
Come off as being arrogant.
And so I'm having this like, I'm really debating this. I'm wrestling with it, right? And here comes God in his voice, and he goes, why do you hide every good thing I've done in your life?
Wow.
And I just got smoked by God, man.
bro.
And I was like, oh, man.
He got smoked.
Yeah. I was like, it was a right hook,
Yes,
man.
sir,
Whatever
bro.
you want to say, man.
Yeah.
It was a gut
Yeah,
punch.
he smoked you, bro.
He smoked me.
You got smoked.
Yeah.
I love that.
And so he began to reveal to me that there is a difference between a false humility
Yes, sir.
that hides everything, that doesn't talk about anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
A pride that says I'm a self-made man, which there is no such thing as a self-made man. We're going to talk about that later.
Yep.
And a humbleness that comes only from God that says, man, only through God in a story, right? So I began to look at it, and I was that wicked servant.
Wow.
I was that last one.
Last dude.
I hit it. I hit it all of it, every bit of it, right? And I thought through this religious upbringing and different things that humbleness was just keeping it all to yourself and not revealing that, right? So God just begins to really challenge me. Well, then we launch into the end of 2019, and God's challenging me once again. And he just he challenged me to write something.
Right.
And I began to put it out, and I shared this with Wes the other day, or on the last podcast. And I was guilty of holding back, right? I had held all these things in, and I was that wicked servant, right? And I post this deal on there, and man, he just comes in and he says, I'm changing your identity. Yep. You're now the challenger. And I was like, whoa, and tears come to my eyes. I start crying.
Yep. Bro. It was an encounter.
Yeah, it was an encounter. And then I go down, I get in the shower, and it was this representation of a cleansing. And he comes in again, and he takes my old identity of this fearful person who didn't want to share things, who was always worried about pleasing people, all these different things.
Right.
And he says, hey, you're no longer the fearful one. You're now the challenger. So now whenever I go and I present these things, or I present this concept and I begin to get nervous, then here comes God's voice, and he says, hey, you're the challenger.
Yep.
Hey, you're the challenger.
Yep.
I'm in you.
Yep.
I've taken residence inside of you. Go out in my strength, go out with my power, go out, share the message. Don't just hide it as an idea in your head or a sentiment in your heart. Don't just keep it here.
Right.
Work out its implications in every detail, right? And as you begin to go through these scriptures, man, it's so simple, but at the same time, incredibly powerful.
Well, let's say too, it's also who God called you to be. I think this is a good spot to interject this thought. One of the things that when you look at your life, I think that every believer, every Christian person goes through that spiritual encounter. That's part of it. I think that God comes after your identity. He comes after not just so much your behaviors, because a lot of people, well, it's your sin. Well, it is your sin. It's your behavior, but it's also your identity. It's also how you perceive yourself to be through your past experiences, right? So much of that gets messed up because life is tough. And depending on how your testimony lays out, if you have like a real rough testimony where you grew up in the bricks, in the mud, and you just struggled your whole life, or if you grew up in a real nice home with good Christian parents that took you to church and instilled good moral values in you, both of those people still have identity flaws, right? Things that are not true about who God has called them to be. That God comes after, and he comes after it, man. He comes to get it. He comes to reveal and point the lie out, and he shows you. I love about God, he doesn't just point out where things are not true. He says, let me show you what you really are. It's almost like a replacement, right? It's like, no, you're not really a fearful person. You're actually a challenging person. You're actually gonna walk in the rooms and not be afraid to speak up and tell the truth. You're gonna be in spaces where you're gonna lead, right? And so all of these things, man, I think that for our listeners, man, you need to understand what we're talking about really is your Christ-centered, right, God-given identity, who he has called you to be.
That's right.
So this is really good stuff, man.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we want to really challenge every listener that we've got out there, anybody watching, listening, whatever, is to allow God to begin to break these chains in your life, right? There are certain things that, man, the devil, he will use anything, even things that are good. He can twist those up. It's amazing to watch, right? And I mentioned, through the spiritual religious upbringing that I had, a lot of the things that were in my life were good.
Right.
But the devil had somehow managed to take those good things and twist them up and make me hide them, or, all these things, or believe that was my identity, or all these things, right? Well, then here comes God, and he completely changes my identity. Well, what I love is that God does this throughout the Bible, right? And
come on, yeah.
we've talked about this before, but Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, Jacob is one of my favorites. And Steve touched on this, and I've mentioned it before. And man, I think sometimes we hear things and then we don't want to repeat ourselves, or we don't. But I think repetition is good.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we got to hear it over and over and over.
Yeah.
So that way we can actually begin to digest it and let it rest in us, all these different things.
That's good, bro.
So Jacob, right, he's a deceiver. He's the first identity thief probably ever, right?
Yeah,
before virtual identity theft and all that kind of stuff, this dude goes and steals his brother's identity.
Yeah. Played him out.
Yep. And so God meets him on this road, and he begins to wrestle with him, and he keeps asking him. He says, "What is your name?" Right? And he's making Jacob own his sin, right? And he says, "My name is Jacob." Finally, he owns it. He confesses his sin. And then he comes clean, and God immediately says, "No. You're no longer Jacob. You're now Israel."
Right.
And he gives him this promise of who he's going to be and this great nation is going to be born out of, all these things, right? And just incredible times, right? And then Matthew, Matthew the tax collector, he was originally Levi. Right. And then Jesus comes to him and he says, no, you're now Matthew, which if you know the definition of Matthew means gift of God. So if you look at Matthew's life, he's like the most hated guy in society. Tax collectors, they
can't stand that boy.
They can't stand that dude because they were deceptive. They were all these things, right? They were skimming off the top. All this stuff. And so the only way for Matthew to get recognized in all of this change that's happened in him is for him to be like, man, my name is Matthew. This whole thing has just been a gift of God. Like there's no other way to describe it other than the fact that this is straight up a gift from God, right? And so you look at Saul to Paul and like this identity change that begins to happen in these guys' lives.
Encounters, man.
It was encounters. And so I think there's this yearning that Jesus, he just wants to heal us, and he wants us to be the pure version of who he created us to be, right? We're created in his image. He created us perfectly, but then the devil comes in and he begins to hit us with these lies.
And sin too. I mean, sin, we're born into it.
Yeah, we're born into
it, man.
We're born into sin.
Real situation there.
And I think that's one of those things too, born into sin, that I think is an interesting thing, because I think we just take it as, man, we're born into sin. Well, I think we need to dive in deeper into ourselves and say, what sin in particular was I born into, right? Because I know that the devil is not going to get me with womanizing.
Right.
He's never been able to get me and sustain me on like porn. He's never been able to get me drunk. All these different things. So like those temptations, those temptations don't affect me, right?
Right.
So I wasn't born into that sin per se.
Right.
But there's other areas of my life where I have been born into sin, and it's what I fight on a daily basis, right? My son, he's a little boomer. This kid's on fire for the Lord.
Little G.
Yep. He loves the Lord, man, and he wants to do right, but he's still young. He's still growing. And from the age of 2, we saw this lie or this sin, I should say, of dishonesty.
Right.
Age of 2, we could already see it.
Yep.
And it was out of a place. It was out of a place of wanting to protect himself. He didn't want to get in trouble. So we started having conversations with him whenever he was 2 years old, and to what degree he understood, I'm not sure. But we were like, hey, if you just tell the truth, you're not going to get a spanking, or you're not going to get time out, or you're not going to whatever. We may have a conversation. We may talk about it and correct the action, but you're not going to get in trouble.
Right.
And so then he would go along. Well, recently he was on the Xbox and he wanted to buy this game. And he goes, hey, Dad, can I buy this game? And I said, yeah. So I go in there and I start to put the code in, and it kicks me to another screen that I'd never seen before. And I was like, oh, that was weird. So I hit the back button. I go back. I put my code in one more time. And this time I read, it sends me to that same screen, and it says, this passcode has been entered incorrectly too many times. It now requires a password.
Right.
And so I look at him and I'm like, hey, I was like, did you put in the passcode? Did you try and put in the passcode? No, Dad, I didn't do that. And Harper's in there too. And I said, Harper, did you do it? And she's like, no, I didn't do it. And I'm like, guys, this Xbox is smarter than you think, you know, and it's outsmarted you. I said, somebody has put in the passcode incorrectly too many times.
Yeah, trying to get it.
Trying to get to the game and just trying to do it on his own. And he doesn't own it. And I walk out of the room and I'm like, man, I've raised you better than that, right?
Yeah.
And then he walks out, and then we come back and we're all in the kitchen, me, Harper, and Graham. And I'm like, guys, I'm going to sit here all day until somebody owns up to what happened inside that room. So I got all the time in the world. I'm
the
like,
Xbox, man. Hit them up. Yeah.
Yep. And mom was gone. She was gone to run some errands. And so I was just hanging out with the kids and all that kind of stuff. And Harper begins to tell the story about what happens, right?
Right.
And she says, well, I put it in twice. And then Graham said, well, I think I know it.
Sure.
I'm going to put it in, right? And you can imagine this is exactly how it goes. Well, Graham looks across the island at her, and he goes, that's not true, Harper. I mean, calm as all get out.
Right.
And she goes, yes, it is, Graham. That's exactly what happened. And she starts to cry, and she's welling up. And he goes, no, it's not, Harper. That's not true. That's not true. And he was calm, man.
Yeah.
And then I said, fine. I said, if this is going to be the way it is, the Xbox is gone.
Yeah,
Either it's going to the dumpster, I'm selling it. We're done. If it's going to create lying and deception inside this home, we're done.
Root of it, yeah.
And so then Graham chimes in. He goes, okay, Dad, I did it. And so then I asked him the question. I said, okay, did you do it? Are you telling me this right now because you just want to save the Xbox and you're willing to go down?
Right.
You're willing to fall on that sword and be done? Or did you actually do it? Because now there's this like deception that I don't know what's true and what's not true.
Right.
So which one is it? And he goes, no, I did it. And I said, okay, Harper, you can leave the room, right? Well, then he's sitting there and it's that awkward silence, right?
Yeah.
And God whispers in and he goes, let it well up. And so Graham's sitting there across the island from me. He's grabbing onto the sink and it's just quiet. And then God says it again. He says, let it well up. And 5 seconds later, Graham just collapses. Boom.
Wow.
And starts crying.
Yep.
All this kind of stuff, right? It's coming out of him.
Yeah.
And then he starts to chime in and he starts to say things and he's like, man, I want to be so good. And I know that you are good and I just want to be good. And I was like, whoa, hold on. And then God whispers in and he says, now redeem it.
Yep.
And redeem it means make it new, right?
Yep.
So this thing that he had been born into deception. That's how God had been trying to get, the devil had been trying to get Graham.
Right.
Was through this deception and through dishonesty. That was the sin he was born into, one of, right?
Yeah.
And so what we can do is, as dads, as we raise these young boomers all that, is to begin to pull those weeds out because those weeds don't have deep roots yet. Right. They're still shallow.
But they're going to spring up though. Yeah.
Yep. And so I said to Graham, I said, man, hey, check this out. We've seen this in you since you were 2 years old. And he goes, I know. And I said, so you can point to this moment right here as the redemption of Jesus coming in and saying, hey, let's take that out, redeem it, right? I said, can you remember this moment for the rest of your life? He goes, yes, sir. I said, well, then let's remember it, right?
Definitely will. Yeah. It's good.
So,
So I guess the moral of the story, man, really, when kids begin to struggle with sin and when stuff like as you referenced the weeds, that was good. The weed reference, weeds representing like behavioral things, right? That are really rooted. It's at the root, it's a sin in their life. That's where I feel like a lot of their identity begins to really even be formed. It's because if as parents, like you guys did, you walked him through that. Patiently, but also intentionally. I believe that when parents don't do that, when we just let stuff slide and let stuff go, and even in our home, me and Shelly would kind of pick our battles because Jarian and Geneva are very different, and they get mixed up, and it's like, let that one go. But then certain things we don't let go because we recognize the power of that moment shaping their identity.
That's right.
So if you continue to let stuff go like that, and let stuff go like that in that one area that you guys identified at 2 years old, this is going to be a problem. He is going to continue to live that out, right? And that's where I feel like a lot of what we're seeing now in people, right, all over the world, which is really bizarre and interesting at the same time. People all over the world in business, in sports, right, in every arena you could think of, their identities, man, are tied to a lot of them what they experienced growing up, and it takes the power of God. It takes Jesus to come in and begin to work on it. That's why it's so important to have these conversations, man.
That's right.
To look at Scripture and say, okay, well, what does the Bible say about people's names, their identity, and what they were, going to become, what they were called to do, and even, scripturally, it doesn't mean your name was your call. It actually was like what you were going to do. What your purpose was tied to your name. Isn't that crazy how God, so God did all of this, right? Profoundly. So I think it's Jacob to Israel, Saul to Paul, man. Look at our own lives too, right? We all had these encounters with the Lord where he just touched our hearts, man, and just began to work. I think that's where, my passion is to see men come to that place. I don't care how old you are, right? You could be 35, 45, even in your 60s.
Doesn't matter.
You're never too old, man. If you're still alive, man, get there, right?
That's right.
Allow the Lord to reveal, who you really are, because it's going to transform everything you do.
Man, as we're wrapping this up today, what I'm feeling is that there is a lot of content here, and there's a lot of good information, and I don't want it to get lost in a long episode. And so I think probably one of the best things we can do right now is say, hey, let's break this up into 2 episodes, part 1, part 2. And so identity part 1 and identity part 2. So that way you guys can digest this, let it sit for a little while, let it resonate, and maybe we'll release them a little bit different. We'll just kind of see how it all leads. But we want to break this down into 2 episodes for you guys.
That's good.
So that way you can really grasp what we're talking about, because there is a lot of depth. It's very simple. In all reality, it's very simple, but there is a ton of depth
that's
inside of this conversation. And so I want to make sure that we don't just blaze through this and not give it the time that it needs. So let's bust this thing up into 2 episodes and come back on the next one.
Good stuff. I enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Hey, now I got one last challenge for everybody. Go out, be the epicenter of the boom. If you liked what you heard today on The Epicenter, be sure and click that subscribe button down below and click the bell so that you're notified whenever we drop new content. Also, be sure to connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And know that you can find all of our episodes on your favorite platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Now go out, be the epicenter of the boom.